Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn. Beautiful day here on the Sunshine Coast. I've just in the last 5 minutes seen a snake and a couple of kangaroos, so it's all happening here. I think it was a tree snake actually, so nothing too much to be concerned about, but just a reminder that they are around. And anyway, this outpouring, this global outpouring of the passing of Queen Elizabeth has been a very interesting social phenomenon to observe, and the collective hysteria that's involved around passing of, one of the most recognisable faces on the planet. And it really is an interesting eye-opener from the perspective of this idea of mass formation psychosis. And to learn more about this, I suggest you look at some of the work of Matthias Desmet, the Belgian psychologist, lecturer and author, and his understanding of the collective. It really is one of the most interesting perspectives that I have seen in regard to define and understand this collective hysteria at the level of psychology. And it's really refreshing to see this actually, and it's really a different point of view or understanding or perspective from my understanding of the collective in spiritual terms, and what this actually means because of the psychology of groupthink, of the mass collective consciousness of even what's called the collective soul, and even the Greek word egregor is significant because of this idea of the collective, where we are all connected to, regardless of who we are on this planet, at some level we are all connected to the collective. And what's important to understand is, as our process of evolution takes place, we slowly have a diminished absorption of this collective mass consciousness and are able to enter a state of individuality more, where our views, our perspectives, our opinions are not determined by the collective. And this is very important for our evolution and very important for this paradigm shift that we are going through now, because this is part of the rite of passage. And this does not necessarily mean that going against the grain is a good thing, or not sharing the values of the collective is a good thing, but the ability to think for yourself, the ability to go against the herd when the herd is adopting viewpoints that are completely insane, or celebrating oppressors, and really having a lack of wisdom as to, in this instance, in this video, in the context of what I'm going to say now, the power structure on this planet, and the accumulation or hoarding of resources by certain families to the massive detriment of the collective. And then for the collective to go on to actually celebrate their semi-enslavement or their impoverishment. What we're witnessing around the world at the moment really does beg a belief, because I am seeing it from this point of view as yet another example of this collective mass hypnosis or collective insanity, where we see this inversion of reality being shown up again and again. And this work from a psychological perspective, this mass formation psychosis, however you actually define psychosis itself, I would suggest that this outpouring of and celebration of the royal family is a form of psychosis, based on facts and based on the celebration of the enslavement of the masses through being materially impoverished due to one family hoarding resources. And it's amazing to think that for example, that the gold carriage of the Queen is actually weighs 4 tons of solid gold, and it's worth over $370 billion, that one carriage alone. And the values of which the so-called monarch would show for their subjects. And by this, I mean, what's more important, that the Queen or the monarch, whoever it is, has a gold carriage, or that the subjects live in poverty? And what we're seeing now unfold with this energy crisis that is going to hit Europe obviously all the Northern Hemisphere this winter, but particularly in Europe, will be so catastrophic that personally, even here in Australia, where we're about to enter summer, we're in spring now obviously, where people seem completely oblivious to what is about to unfold and seem to be in a genuine state of hypnosis, celebrating this passing of this monarch and this outpouring of support for the royal family and interest in the royal family. It really is a form of collective hysteria. And the thing to understand, I've written a whole chapter about this in my book actually, Paradigm Shift, The Global Awakening of Humanity, 2020 to 2040, by myself. I've written a whole chapter on this. It's called Why Some People Just Don't Get It. And actually, if I get time, I'll actually read out that entire chapter and make a video of it, and just for that one chapter alone, because from an esoteric level, from an esoteric perspective, this this understanding of the collective consciousness, it reveals that the mass consciousness, when it's completely plugged in at this level only, and as I said, it's in shades or degrees as to entering the state of individuality or rising above the collective. We're still all connected at some level there, but to be able to observe the collective and form our own opinions, our own views, it actually shows a rising of consciousness actually. And the reality is that the collective will always try and drag you down to be part of the herd, because the herd is very threatened actually at a deep psychological level when there are people who speak out against the norm, the consensus reality, and start to basically show, particularly when it's used with clear logic, why these belief systems are just completely ridiculous. And we can see this on all kinds of levels. It's going on in this, what I call the convergence of reality, or the convergence of events, with things like the push for electric vehicles and the sustainable measures around that, and the feasibility about that, regardless of the economic feasibility. And it's just ridiculous that these agendas keep getting pushed onto people that are not in the best interest of the people, and that people seem to just go along with this virtue signaling that it's some kind of moral superior attitude, because they bend their own will to the will of this agenda being put forward. And we can see this with the outpouring of grief here. To give you an idea what's happening now in Europe, they're planning for rolling blackouts this winter, and the Euro Commission is actually proposing a mandatory cut on electricity for all nations, which will be a percentage of their electrical intake or their electrical capacity. So we can see that these measures are actually going to get increasingly dire, and the economic outlook and the energy outlook for Europe this winter is looking very, very concerning at best. And it's only obviously September now, so there's a long way to go before it starts to get really cold. But the outpouring of grief, it really is quite amazing, considering the Queen owned 300 residences. She had all the crown land. There's no inheritance tax that Charles has to pay for everything that's passed down to him. And people need to study history and realise that the colonial imperial attitudes and the colonisation of countries is basically just a form of looting and pillaging. I mean, the royal family referred to themselves firstly as the firm, and it's basically an extremely complex corporate structure where the real assets are are basically camouflaged, so to disperse it, so it's not actually very clear exactly what the true net worth is of the royal family. And ABS figures, one commentator claimed that the ABS figures for the 2017 financial year reveal that in Australia alone, the royal family is worth $5.8 trillion. Because if you actually understand the property laws, when you own a property, then you own the title. and in fact the Crown still owns the actual land. So that's in Australia alone. And in Australia, approximately one third of people own their house outright, one third of people have a mortgage, and one third of people rent. And yet, for some reason, there's this outpouring of grief for this one family that hoards, in a way that's almost unimaginable, resources and leaves the rest of the society completely impoverished. And yet there's some kind of deep grief or outpouring of sympathy or something. You're actually supporting the people who actually directly financially oppress you. And that is just completely ridiculous. And in Australia, the Crown land is almost 1/4 of Australia. And apparently in Canada, the Crown land is almost 90% of the nation's land. And now that Charles has become king, he's actually completely immune to both civil or criminal proceedings. That means that Charles can never be charged with a crime, ever. And not only that, is that he actually doesn't need to travel with a passport, because the reality is that the passports are issued in his name. So this is the state of affairs of the world. And in England, the Crown Estate owns about 250,000 acres of farmland across the UK, which is about 0.5% of the nation's surface. So we see that this royal family, it's basically a corporation that considers itself to be above the law, cannot be prosecuted by the law, and simply declares that everything is owned by the Crown land, which it's exceptional to think that in this day and age that this archaic tradition is upheld to the detriment of all the members of society, and yet the collective, because it's steered in this way through a complex process of social engineering, of behaviour modification, to actually support this. And this form or version of mass formation psychosis, it just shows the dangerous ways the collective can function. And the support for some of these Marxist values that we're seeing outpouring now also shows the ability the collective can be influenced in negative ways because of this weakness of the mind, because of this lack of discernment, because of this lack of individuality, and this inability also at a deeper level to actually perceive good from evil. It's quite staggering that we're basically living through another version of this, but it's the same level of consciousness expressing itself in different ways. And that's the important thing to understand. And this will always continue with the collective, while there is this social engineering that is for the detriment or to produce adverse effects for the collective, adverse belief systems. It could be engineered for positive things, actually. So it's not that the collective itself is necessarily bad in this way, but more the fact that there is this top-down engineering. Because if the leaders of this planet were benevolent, were compassionate, were understanding, then there could be the collective, and the consensus reality could be extremely beneficial, extremely harmonious, extremely positive. So that needs to be taken into account. But unfortunately, the rulers of this planet, they're masters of the occult. They're absolute masters of the occult. And this outpouring, this period of mourning, it's a massive loosh fest to generate this emotion, this support, this groundswell engagement, and reinforce this belief system as the batons pass to a new monarch, to a new head of the royal family, which obviously is Charles, and to continue this ongoing oppression and blatant suppressing financially, at the very minimum, of the collective. And the fact that the collective champion it, when we think of the global awakening, it really should be a reality check for us all to just exactly see how far we actually have to go to break out of this state of collective hypnosis, because there is enough wealth in that one family. I mean, some of the statistics are absolutely staggering if you take into account all the various components of wealth and so on. What is being hoarded by just one family, and the potential, if wealth was distributed in a way that could alleviate poverty, suffering, famine, all these things, and the fact that there's this Stockholm syndrome type attitude to the royal family, it just shows that we really are living in a very precarious time, where the wealth is concentrated in more and more, fewer and fewer in hands. And people talk about, people like Elon Musk being the richest person in the world. It's not even close when you consider some of these royal families, like the Saudi royal family is the second richest family in the world, and the Windsor family is considered to be the richest. But again, because these events actually are playing out the way they are, as I said in a previous video, expect much greater criticism and scrutiny of the royal family, and this already started. Expect much greater revelations coming out to people who thought they were awake or considered them to be extremely aware of one particular social issue, whether it's the pandemic or something like this. Well, it's going to be like a dominoes falling, where people start to see this illumination creeping into all aspects of our life, particularly with these institutions, because we are in the final degrees now of Pluto and Capricorn, and the institution of the royal family, as archaic as it may seem, I mean, they have been involved in the slave trade, and that is public knowledge. That's not some kind of theory or rumor or something. And all the other things they did, you don't suddenly have trillions of dollars of wealth by just playing the stock market or having a very successful company. We're talking about the accumulation of wealth and riches across the ages from various countries. I mean, at one point, the sun never set on the British Empire. And even with the passing of the Queen, India now want one of the diamonds back that's in one of the Queen's crowns, which was a huge diamond, which is worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. And there's some calls for that to be returned to India, which shows that there is this colonialism, this imperialism, and this idea of divine born to rule. And basically, the question I have is, based on what? And based on what actions or philanthropic measures or taking care of the subjects can this accumulation of wealth actually be justified? It's staggering to think that so much of the points and the data and the facts about this hoarding of resources is completely oblivious to most people, and we see people lining up for 12 hours to pay homage to someone that they've never even met. And as that saying goes, charity begins at home, and if you want to start making a difference, then focus on the immediate people around you, and let's have a bit of a conversation about the relevance of the royal family, the significance of what they actually contribute to society, because their individual and collective philanthropic measures are not even close to what they're actually keeping hoarded in vaults and under various deeds and corporations and God knows what other legal entities they have resources accumulated. And meanwhile, you're going to see mass poverty and a very bitter winter for the subjects of the royal family across the UK this winter and throughout Europe. And that's not even taking into account all the other various financial issues that are coming to the surface. And this financial system is teetering on the brink of total collapse. So stay tuned for more. I'll be making a video for the equinox energy update, and this is just another piece of the puzzle for this ongoing paradigm shift. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.